Hi, this is Mr. Curtis, and today's topic is the circulatory system of humans and other animals. We're going to start first by discussing the plumbing of the circulatory systems. Well, why do we need to have a circulatory system? And it has to do with how do you get food and oxygen, and how do you get rid of waste deep within a multicellular animal. Now, like the middle of your body, your liver, how do you get food? How do you get oxygen to that thing? Well, those cells need food and oxygen just like any other cells. How do you get it there? This animal, for example, this is called a hydra. Some of you might know your Greek mythology about the monster, the hydra. Well, that's what this was named for. It's actually a relative of the jellyfish. It has stinging cells. But anyway, this animal, as I'll show you in just a second here, this animal is only 2 cells thick. There's only 2 cells there. Plus, you have this mouth that allows for nutrients, oxygen, and the water that it's living in to go and circulate. The outside cells then can get food and oxygen directly from the water, and the inside cells can get food and oxygen through its mouth. By the way, this would be what kind of digestive system? Complete or incomplete? I'll leave that for you to figure out. So this animal doesn't have to worry about any kind of circulatory system because water moves around, and it's actually the water that it lives in is its circulatory system. Whereas us, how do you get food and oxygen to your liver deep within your body? It would have to, if we didn't have a circulatory system, it would have to go from cell to cell to cell to cell to cell. And that would not work at all. We wouldn't be able to live. So we need to have a circulatory system. Do all animals with a circulatory system have the same plumbing? The answer obviously is no. Here is an earthworm, for example. Look at this thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hearts. And they only pump one direction. I wonder if Harry knows that, one direction. And so as blood comes in, all these little hearts are all pumping one way. 5 different hearts in a worm here. Now, this little animal is called a Daphnia, sometimes referred to as a water flea. Yes, they're found in the ponds and streams around here, perfectly harmless. If you look at this thing, and if we're lucky enough this year, right in this section is its heart, if you can call it a heart. It's just basically like a sac that just pumps, and that's its heart. Its fluid is also clear as opposed to ours. Fishies. Fishies have a 2-chambered heart. If you look at this thing, this is considered 1 chamber, 2 chambers, and it's all one circle like this. It gets pumped out here, goes to the gills, goes out to the body, comes back from the body, gets used up, and then goes directly to the heart and then to the gills again. Interesting stuff. A froggy has a 3-chambered heart, and with a frog, and then with us, we'll move on here, we have, as many of you do know, a 4-chambered heart. And we'll get into the parts of that in a little bit. Now, this is just for comparison, and you can see the blood flow of the 3 different types that we were talking about here. Just take a moment if you're interested and look at this. For example, with the frog, when the heart pumps blood out here, half goes up into the lungs and the other half goes out to the body. So there's a mixture of low oxygen blue blood and high oxygen red blood in a frog system. Not very efficient. If you compare that to our hearts, which is a 4-chamber, the low oxygen blood and the high oxygen blood are separated. Now, how much blood do you think your heart pumps in a minute? So I want you to guess here. One of these 5. Is it... Nope, it's not A. Are you still there? How many of you guessed D? Raise your hand. Oh, you're wrong. It's 1.5 gallons per minute that you pump. That's 75 gallons an hour. That's 1,800 gallons a day. Do you have 1,800 gallons of liquid inside you? No, you have about 2 gallons. But your heart is pumping that much all the day long. That requires a tremendous amount of energy. And so this is one of the reasons why as mammals we require a relatively high amount of food compared to, let's say, a snake. You know, a snake might eat once a month. I'd like to see you eat once a month. All right. As you know, with our heart, there's many different sections of it, and at the very end of this video, I'm going to have a chart for you to fill out. But basically, we're not going to get into a whole lot of stuff. Yes, you'll need to know the different chambers. You'll need to know the main artery here, like this is the pulmonary, this is the aorta, this is the superior inferior vena cava. And there's also ones that are not shown here. For example, oopsie, that's not what I wanted. I still want to draw here. There we go. So there's some that aren't shown here, like the pulmonary veins. And we'll get into that more later in this video. One of the things that I want you to realize is when we look at a two-dimensional drawing like the heart, it's very difficult to understand how everything is located, how it all works. And this is one of the reasons that I offer you a heart dissection in this unit, is that way you can see things in three-dimensional. You can really get an idea of where everything fits together. And it's very difficult to look at these 3 drawings and say, well, how does this go with that? Because it really doesn't look much like the previous picture. The 3 photos or the 3 pictures I've shown you here, very different. If you get to see the real thing, then hopefully you'll understand things a little better. This picture I've put in here because of what causes your heart to beat. You have a small little tissue here called a sinoatrial node, and that's really your pacemaker. This thing will send signals directly to the other parts of the heart. Yes, this thing also does receive, this thing also does receive signals directly from your brain through something called, I believe it's the vagus nerve. But anyway, it also will send signals out to your heart even if this were to be cut. The heart will continue to beat for a while, even if that were to cut. All right, we have 3 types of vessels in your plumbing. We have arteries, we have veins, and we have capillaries. The artery, that carries blood away from the heart. If you remember artery, away, they both start with A's, artery away, that's one way to remember that. Veins, they carry blood to the heart, and capillaries we'll get to in just a second. Now notice this has nothing to do with, oops, sorry about that. It has nothing to do with being low oxygen or high oxygen. It has to do with blood flow. Arteries away, veins too. Veins also have valves in them. So remember that. You should probably write that down. Veins have valves. Veins, valves. And every time you squeeze a muscle, it squeezes your veins, pushing some of that blood back to the heart. Unfortunately, as you get older, some of these veins with the valves break apart. The valves break apart, and so you end up with these wonderful things. These are spider veins, and these will show up on your legs, which, you know, sign of old age, unfortunately. Now, let's look a little bit more into the plumbing part. And we have here the arteries and veins, but one thing that we didn't talk about was the capillaries. These are the smallest vessels, and these are where blood does its work. This is where the food and oxygen is distributed, and also where waste materials like carbon dioxide, urea, ammonia, protein wastes, that's all picked up there. Every capillary is super, super thin, and so it's between the thinness of the capillary where food and oxygen comes out and waste products like carbon dioxide are picked up. Every place in your body except for your eyeballs and your bones will have a capillary next to it. So every place you look, if this is a bunch of cells here, a capillary will only be 2 cells away. Every cell is next to a capillary, allowing for blood in the capillaries to exchange food and oxygen and get rid of the waste. That's pretty amazing. That's a lot of veins running through your body. Let's talk quickly about some diseases that happen in your veins and arteries. One is called atherosclerosis. This is hardening of the arteries. Basically, it's a buildup of cholesterol, mostly due to poor diet, smoking, and lack of exercise. Normally over here, we have a good artery, and you notice that it's free flowing. Here you can see that there's now a buildup of this junk, buildup of fat in your veins. Why your body does that? It's just a place to store it. It just doesn't know it's the bad place to store it. You can imagine what happens. Your blood pressure goes up, blood can't get through, and as you'll see in the next couple photos here, sometimes the blood is stopped. And if that's a real problem, of course, if it happens in your heart. If you have these things, which are called the coronary arteries. Coronary arteries feed blood to the heart. If one of those becomes blocked, then you have this whole section of the heart not receiving food and oxygen. That means it's going to die or be damaged, and there's where you get your heart attacks. This is another photo. This is actually an X-ray. So what they'll do is they will inject a special dye into your vessels and then take an X-ray, and it will show, as it shows here, there's a blood vessel that's 100% blocked. It's supposed to be like this one over here, where you can see how the blood is flowing smoothly throughout the whole heart. Here it's blocked. This is one of the diagnostic tools that doctors will use before doing surgery. Now, once they do find a blockage, what do? They do something called bypass surgery, where they take a vessel out of your leg or someplace else, they'll attach it to the aorta, and they bypass the blocked artery. Here we have the blockage, and they'll take this new vessel and go around the bad spot. If you have, for example, a triple bypass, that means that they did 3 of them. If you had quadruple, 4, and so on. One of the questions comes up is, well, what happens to the area of the leg that they took the artery out of? A lot of times what your body will do is recognize that it can't get blood going through those areas, and so blood will be sent through other areas so that way it doesn't affect your legs as much. I want to talk a few minutes now about blood pressure. It's measured with 2 numbers, something called diastolic. This is when the pressure when the heart is at rest, and systolic when the pressure is beating. Normally, a good blood pressure would be something like 120/80. This would be your systolic, and this would be your diastolic. If you get this over 100, that's not good. If this gets up into the 140 region, that's not good. and then your doctor is probably going to prescribe some blood pressure medication to keep those numbers low. What does high blood pressure lead to? Well, it can lead to a stroke, which is a ruptured blood vessel. Just think of a bike tire. If you have a bike tire and the pressure builds up too much, you'll get a bubble in it, and eventually that bubble will blow up. Oh, come on here. That blood will blow up, rupture, and break. No different in your veins and arteries. If the blood pressure gets too high, then you run that risk. Now I want to take a couple minutes and talk about blood itself. Blood, I want you to think of blood as not a liquid. I want you to think of blood as what it really is, and that is a tissue. It is a group of cells working together to perform a function. If you think about blood as tissue, it doesn't take on the gory stuff that we see in the movies, the slasher movies and things like that. It's a bunch of cells working together. They just happen to be floating in a liquid. And by the way, the liquid part of your blood is called plasma. It also contains special proteins as well. There are many different types of blood cells. We're going to talk about 3 different types. You have erythrocytes. If you remember erythro, that would be red. Leukocytes, white blood cells, like leukemia. That's white cancer, condition of white cancer. And the 3rd type is something called platelets. Red blood cells, these are the ones that carry oxygen to the body. They also pick up carbon dioxide and return that to the lungs, which then get eliminated. This is all done through a protein in your red blood cells called hemoglobin. By the way, hemoglobin also picks up this chemical rather easily, carbon monoxide. And once carbon monoxide picks this up, it locks onto that hemoglobin and it can no longer do the job that it's supposed to. This is why carbon monoxide poisoning is so dangerous. Now this is not carbon dioxide. That's something different. That's a normal chemical that's found within every time you exhale. Carbon monoxide, that's something completely different. White blood cells, many different types, but 2 that we're going to be talking about are B cells and T cells, because these things which I have labeled in purple, that are stained purple here, these things, those are the disease fighters. By the way, it's T cells in which HIV attacks and destroys. Lastly, I want to talk about these tiny blood cells, which are called platelets. These are involved with clotting. When you have a boo-boo, these things will recognize that you've got a boo-boo, break open, release chemicals, and the clotting process will begin. One of the problems with our artificial heart, we're seeing a lot more of those being developed. About 30 years ago is when the first artificial hearts were used. There was a gentleman named Barney Clark, who I think was the first one. The problem with these artificial hearts, of course, is that platelets will recognize all of this stuff as not real tissue, and they will break apart. So then you get clots where you don't want to have clots. What doctors will then do is give the patient blood thinners, which will stop platelets from doing their job. Unfortunately, when you have blood thinners going through your body, then you don't clot when you do want to clot. So it's kind of a give and take. Which one do you want? And it's part of the problem with using artificial hearts. All right, so this is our last drawing for the day. I'm going to do some labeling here, and I want you to label these on your drawing as well. If you want to, you can scooch this video up to the very end, and I will I will have this all labeled for you, or if you want to, you can just watch me do it, whatever you prefer. So let's start here with these chambers here. I'm just going to put a 1, 2, a 3, and a 4. So the number 1 here, this would be a right atrium. Why is the right on the left side? Well, that's because you're looking at a patient. So if you're looking at me here, this is my right side. That's why they do that. Number 2 is the left atrium. 3 is the right, I'm going to abbreviate, ventricle. And 4 is the left ventricle. Other parts that I would like you to know, let's choose a different color here. This vessel coming in right here, we'll label that as 5. That is the superior vena cava. And then down here, number 6, that's the inferior vena cava. Same as up here. Does it mean one's better than the other? No. In anatomy terms, superior means above, inferior means below. All right, let's choose a different color here. Now, let's take blood coming out of the right ventricle. This will be, not to confuse you, I want to make this right here, that'll be number 7. This is the pulmonary artery. So this would be blood going to a lung, and it's relatively low in oxygen. Once it goes out to the lung, then it's going to come back into these things, which I'll label as 8. That would be the pulmonary veins, blood coming back from the lungs. When it goes into there, then it would go into the the left atrium, left ventricle, and then it comes up underneath into, let's see, what color have I not used yet? Here, this will be number 9, I guess, and that'll be the aorta. That's supposed to be an O. All right, now last thing I'm going to do is show you the pathway of the blood through the heart. And this will be something that you'll be learning as we do the anatomy dissection. So let me, let's see. So blood comes in, let's see, I'll use yellow here. Blood comes in through the vena cavas, goes into the right ventricle, then the right atrium, right ventricle out through the pulmonary arteries to the lungs. Then it comes back oxygenated into the pulmonary veins, into the left atrium, left ventricle, and then out again through the aorta to the body. This would be going out to an arm, this would be going out to the brain. So it branches rather quickly, and then it comes behind the heart and goes to the rest of the body way down here. Okay, that wraps up our study of the plumbing of blood and circulatory system, and we'll see you next time.